Good afternoon, everyone. Good to be here. With the Southern Environmental Law Center, a quick overview of SELC. We're celebrating our 30th birthday this year. We started with one attorney in Charlottesville, Virginia. We now have over 70 attorneys working in 9 offices in our 6-state region. We work in Virginia, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and the Carolinas. So I'm going to talk to you about 2 pipelines, the Atlantic Coast and Mountain Valley pipelines that are proposed to pass through Virginia that we've been involved in opposing. Both of these are before FERC to receive approval under the Natural Gas Act. I'll give you a similar caveat to Michael. I'm not an expert in this area. I'm going to give you a broad overview. But I just moved to Charlottesville a year ago. I've been at SELC for a year. One of the first things I noticed are the no pipeline signs just everywhere. You see them you see the bumper stickers, you see the yard signs. If you drive out to the mountains to go hiking in the area where these pipelines are slated to go through, there's tremendous public opposition to these pipelines. It's a big deal to folks who live in this area. The concerns are manifold. One concern, just the impacts of the pipeline on the forests and waterways. Folks are very concerned about private property rights and eminent domain coming in and taking their property. And then the climate change impacts of investing in these pipelines together will cost over $8 billion. So we're looking at an investment in natural gas infrastructure for the next 80 to 100 years. And we believe there's a serious question whether this infrastructure is needed at all. We also think that there is a critical need to look programmatically at our infrastructure needs before moving forward and not look at these pipeline proposals on a case-by-case basis. So give you a quick overview of the Atlantic Coast pipeline. It's about a 600-mile pipeline, 42-inch diameter. We'll go from West Virginia to North Carolina at a cost of over $5 billion. Quick history. Originally, there was a route that was proposed previously that went through, would have gone over Shenandoah and Cheat Mountains, and the Forest Service disapproved that route out of a concern that the route would have impacted a salamander, the cow knob salamander. The Forest Service entered into an agreement with Fish and Wildlife back in 1994 to protect the cow knob salamander's habitat to avoid the need to list the species under the Endangered Species Act, and the Forest Service looked at their obligations under that agreement and determined they could not approve that route because it would harm the salamander. So the route has been moved. The proponents of the project have sought expedited approval and processing by FERC. We've opposed their request for expedited processing. And the new route, although great that it reduces impacts on the national forests, actually goes through similarly sensitive lands and would cross 10 to 11 conservation easements. If the route were approved, it would be the biggest conversion of conservation easements in the history of the program in Virginia. So we just last week filed a motion with FERC asking FERC to disapprove that route because of the impact on those conservation easements. You know, when folks put their property into a conservation easement and tie their own hands, they expect that land to be protected forever. And we've come across a lot of folks who are disappointed that that lands that they expected to be protected in perpetuity may not, after all, be protected in perpetuity. There's the salamander that moved the route, the cow knob salamander. The Endangered Species Act is a powerful law. This is the route for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline going from West Virginia into North Carolina. If I hone in on the route in West Virginia, you see the little dip here. That's the rerouting to address the salamander impacts that will go through the 10 to 11 conservation easements, depending on the precise route that we are also opposing. So the Mountain Valley Pipeline is another project that we're concerned about. It's currently before FERC. It's a little further along in the process. FERC just issued a draft environmental impact statement with comments due in December The environmental impact statement provides an overview of some of the impacts of this project. 30% of the route would cross steep slopes with topography over 15%. Over 4,000 acres with the potential for severe erosion would be disturbed. The route would pass through 51 miles of karst terrain and would cross close to 1,000 water bodies. The right-of-way for these pipelines is basically equivalent to the DC Beltway. So we're looking at a very large swath that would be cut through these sensitive forest lands if the projects were to go forward. So stepping back to when we first learned about these projects in 2014, a number of pipeline projects were proposed. Here you see the blue line is the Atlantic Coast pipeline, and the red or orange line is the Mountain Valley pipeline. The green and yellow lines are pipelines that were announced in 2014 but haven't really moved forward. They're not before FERC. So it's not clear whether they will move forward or not to us. But this underscores the need to look big picture at what infrastructure do we really need and not look at these proposals on a piecemeal basis. So ultimately, in order to approve these pipelines, under Section 7 of the Natural Gas Act, FERC has to issue a certificate, find the certificate of convenience and necessity for the pipeline, and as part of that process, of course, NEPA documents have to be prepared, and under the CEQ environmental impact regulations for NEPA documents, these environmental impact statements do need to look at need, and we've been disappointed that FERC hasn't really been addressing the need question as part of the NEPA analysis. So stepping back, this is a complex question. It's a question of what infrastructure do we need? Things are changing. This is a pretty busy slide, and it's a little bit of a simplification. But what you see here is a shift from coal-fired generation to gas-fired generation. A lot of coal-fired plants are being converted to gas. A lot of new gas units are coming online, and there's a lot of development of gas resources. And so that is the rationale for the additional pipeline proposals that we're seeing put forth by the project proponents. Here you see in blue or purple the existing pipelines, and then the orange in the upper right-hand corner shows the proposed, some of the proposed new pipelines. So the Department of Energy did a study in February of 2015 and determined that higher utilization of existing interstate natural gas pipelines or higher use of existing pipeline infrastructure will reduce the need for new pipelines. So we wanted to drill into that hypothesis a little further. We retained a consulting firm out of Boston, Synapse, to do a study. The study used assumptions for lower than expected use of renewable energy and greater than anticipated conversions of coal-fired power plants to gas-fired, and looked at peak hourly gas demand and compared that to our existing capacity. And the study concluded that there's not a need for these pipelines. Kind of a summary of the conclusion is shown here. We looked at the existing natural gas capacity as of 2015. That's the purple block on the bottom of the graph. That includes both transmission capacity and reported storage capacity. It doesn't include unreported storage capacity, which there's a lot of unreported storage capacity out there. And that unreported storage capacity kind of accounts for this white area here that you see on the graph. So our assessment of existing gas capacity, we believe, is very conservative. If you look at at two projects that are going to increase capacity to move gas, the Transco project, a reversal of a pipeline where gas traditionally only flowed south to north. They have a project before FERC to make that flow bidirectional. So there'll be gas now moving south along that route. And another upgrade, the Columbia pipeline that's using an existing easement, will add additional capacity. So if you look at peak hourly gas demand and compare that to our existing capacity, transmission and storage, our study concluded that there's not a need for these pipelines. Just to drill down a little further, the blue line shows the Transco line that traditionally has flowed north, and through the reversal will flow south. The red pipeline that you see there is the Columbia Gas Transcorp pipeline. That's the pipeline that's being improved through the WB Express project. So those are the two projects that we believe together suggest that there's not a need for this new gas infrastructure. So environmental impacts of these pipelines will be considerable. This is a 12-inch pipeline that was being put in the Jefferson National Forest 2 years ago. Of course, there'll be a much larger easement required and impacts from the 42-inch pipelines. The Forest Service has raised concerns recently with respect to sedimentation impacts from the rerouted Atlantic Coast Pipeline and Mountain Valley Pipeline on iconic brook trout fisheries. And ultimately, looking at the need for this infrastructure, we need to take a big picture look and think about the climate change impacts. That needs to be part of a programmatic approach to an environmental impact statement, because we shouldn't lock ourselves into a future where we rely too much on natural gas generation. We talk about natural gas as the bridge fuel, but 100 years of natural gas generation, that's not a bridge. I mean, that's turning to natural gas as the fuel of the future. So we believe we have the capacity, based on what we've seen. We know it's a complex question, to meet current needs and to basically get over that bridge. We need to be pivoting to increased renewables, solar and wind. This is just a graphic that shows the wind projects. You see the two offshore wind are shown in red, and utility scale solar projects. You see Virginia, Alabama, South Carolina. They're not doing a lot of utility scale solar. There's a lot of potential to do a lot more with solar and wind generation, and that's where we should be heading, not over-reliance on gas. So that's my presentation. I ran through it quickly. Happy to answer any questions if I can. Thank you.